BackChat, we are still in Melbourne. We're just not at our beautiful studio. We have moved over to the Hawthorn Football Club. Very excited to be here with this man. We are sitting in front of current head coach of the Hawthorn Football Club, Sam Mitchell. Hello, mate.
How are you? Thank you for bringing all your gear out. Do appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. Beautifully dressed in your Hawthorn attire. Nice sponsors. I've got to get through a couple of our sponsors. That's okay, Sam. Thank you very much to Whippersnapper. Thank you very much to Shelter, Margaret River Roasting Co., Bluebet, and, of course, Leadable Cameras for helping us put it together. That's why we're here with Sam.
On like a TV set, might I add. It feels like we're on a show.
It is. It's good. It's good. Thanks for providing the facilities here, Sam. Now, first question we ask every guest here on BackChat. You have been on BackChat before with Sam Butler and Will Schofield. Well, this has been reimagined. First question we asked. We know you've done some things as a player. Premierships, captain, best and fairest, Brownlow medal. You've done a fair bit, 300 games. But the first question we ask every guest is, what's your greatest sporting achievement not on the football field? Okay, you can play football. Oh, and you can even coach. Congrats. You done anything else in the sporting realm, Sam?
I won the batting average for I think it was the 6th. So I was about 16,
Yes.
And like the first 11, second, third, fourth. I think might be 5th, 6th, 7th. It's whatever like the close to the worst one was, and I think the average was like 14 or something thereabout. So batting average about as a 16-year-old.
As a 16-year-old, 6th.
Yeah, and you know what? You know why I remember it? Because at the Mooroolbark Football Club, there's, in historical, they've got the big wooden frames up, and it's got S. Mitchell batting average. And on the footy side, on the other side, there's all this names up there a few times or whatever. But on the cricket, I got it on the cricket once, and I was like, yes.
And that's what you're proudest about.
Yes, I'm proud about that.
We don't care what we've done on the football field.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so we do have to. Do you have one of these? Do you have a mounted ball?
I do not have a mounted ball at all.
He's lucky I wasn't bowling when he was batting 15. Just a little bowling trophy there for me. 5 wickets for 16 runs. No big deal in the grand final. But that was under 12s in probably C grade.
Okay, well done. Well, C grade's well above what I was capable of.
Okay, very good. So a little bit on your footy career. I would like to talk to you mostly about your coaching stuff, though. But to start your career, right, you get overlooked at the draft after 2 best and fairest as a junior. You then go and play in a premiership, correct?
At Box Hill, yeah.
And then you get drafted. You then win the Liston medal, the VFL best and fairest. Why were you overlooked? What was the reason?
I was too slow and too short and too fat, probably. I think if you go back to that era, we see it a little bit now with Cripps, but back then it was Koutafidis, and he was the inside midfielder who was, 6'4", and I'm far from that and didn't have any sort of the athleticism. And what I think coaches, I see it now, we cocky type, and we think we can make any athlete into a player. And what it was back then was that every player, we just need Koutafidis types, and we'll teach them how to play footy. Whereas I was good at footy, but far away from athletics. So my knock was all around athleticism.
Now that you've come full circle, what is it now?
There's still temptations for the same type of thing, but I think it's a little bit more well-rounded. Sometimes we look at a player who's raw, and if they have some ability to learn and they've got good mental skills, then you can still make them into really good players. But you can't misplace genuine football talent.
Is there more resources in footy departments and then recruitment that there's not likely a Sam Mitchell lying around in the VFL, or is there someone that could be there?
No, there still is. I mean, if you look at our Hawthorn's recruiting over the last couple of years, we've chosen 4 players out of our Box Hill program, so it's exactly where I came from. So we had Jai Newcomb, who's a very similar position to me. He got chosen in a mid-season draft and has played not every game, but close to every game since getting picked up, despite not going through under-18s programs and those types of things. So there's still hidden gems.
So you get drafted to the Hawks, you do what you do there, you win some premierships, yes, you captain the football club. We could touch on all those. You win a Brownlow medal. Where does the coaching journey start? Like, is it started pre that?
No, yeah, probably. So I made my debut in 2002. And the first sort of coach's course or something that I found that I did was in the end of 2009. So I was sort of 26, and I'd become the captain of the club, and I was looking at leadership and how to improve my influence and positive influence on others, and really working on yourself a lot as an athlete. as a young athlete, you do an enormous amount of work on yourself, which is quite a selfish way to live, but a necessity for a young athlete. Once I'd sort of done all the coursing and all the education I could do, the next progression to increase my influence and positive influence on others was around coaching, and I sort of just dipped my toe in the water at the start, and then I felt like it actually made me a significantly better player. And so now I get as many players into the coach's box as I can and be as transparent with them as I can, because they watch the game with new eyes, and it actually makes them a better player. And James Sicily would be an example. He spent almost a whole year in the coach's box last year, and then now he's playing at a different level. And so that's an example of what it did for me. And probably it was a little bit of a selfish side. At the start, I wanted to be better than I was at that time, and I continued to improve. And then through the coaching education, I obviously had a great passion for it pretty early on.
I still remember the first time I sat in the coach's box was with Woosha and Summer. So John Worsfold, Peter Sumich, and then there's Tony McHale. It was quite early in my career. So come sit in the coach's box, as you've done in James Sicily. And it scared the shit out of me. And I've never wanted to coach again. And it didn't quite make me a better player. It made me, for a period of time, geez, I wonder what they're saying about me out there, because it was quite a different environment than I probably expected.
Because that'd be pretty open and honest up there about
some honest feedback happening up there. It was a close game that we lost. There was some errors made late in the game that Quinton Lynch was one of them. Wasn't some great feedback for Lynchy. Are you ever mindful, like now that you're coaching and you have players around, or I know you relatively well, I don't know your coaching style up there, but you mindful of that when there's someone there, or you just coach?
I don't change because if someone's there. No. Sometimes there's a cone of silence about what is said up there from the guys in there. But you do. I mean, I try to think of the players as as little versions of your children. You can definitely criticise your children, and they can frustrate you significantly, but you still love them. And so with your players, you need to treat them in the same way. They can drive you crazy and do really silly things. But saying that in front of a group of people, you have to be always conscious as a head coach. Whatever I say about a player will be reflected through other people's behaviour towards that player. So you do need to be careful of the ripples, but not because of players in there.
What about, the camera does get on the coach's face every now and then. It's not constantly on there, but are you ever worried about saying something and reading sort of the lips of what you're going to say?
No, I have. I'm a rookie coach, so it's my first year, I might add. So I do see some other coaches and how they know that they might be on camera and they cover. And I am not that far advanced to think about that. I've noticed myself in my peripheral vision on the screen a couple of times, and I'm still finding that a bit awkward, to be fair. So I sort of keep my eyes down, and but I'm not used to being on camera in that forum. So you kind of think of it as a private space, despite it being far from.
I want to speak about your time at West Coast a little bit. That's how we met. Had some mutual friends before we ever met. Matt Spanger being one of those, a premiership player at this club at Hawthorn, who said you and Mitchell probably get along quite well. The verdict may still be out with that, to be honest. But I had expectations of you coming in, and then some impressions as a player once I did get to meet you. What was that process like, coming from initially a one club player that spent a lot of time on premierships, captain the club, to then moving to a club that one you were playing with, but you knew you were going to coach as well? What was that process like?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I think there's this great debate amongst coaching education around what your relationship with players should be like. Should you be their friend? Should you keep a bit of distance to keep it professional? And there's certain parameters that you need to keep as a professional. And I think you need to show some vulnerability. You need to show who you are. You need players to know that you're not perfect and that you make plenty of mistakes. But you also have the team's best interests at heart, and you want the best for the bigger picture and the bigger group. So, I mean, every sort of discussion I had with players, you're always knowing that you're going to coach these guys at some stage. So, you're always a little bit careful maybe about what you said, but it didn't change. I didn't find it too hard. I was quite an old, I think I was 34 or 35 at the time. So, my days of being one of the rat bags in the locker room were mostly gone.
It made him quite easy to find, because as a player, he couldn't do much about it. We knew he was going to be the coach, but used to slip him into fines quite often, just because. I
think I lost money that last year actually due to your fines.
You are a tight ass. Why are we no good at FIFA? I've got to slip that in. I mean, you played a bit of FIFA in that final year. Why?
So what evidence do you have about that because we played one tournament, a doubles tournament, and I lost the final.
Yes.
In a golden goal. So I wouldn't call that, there was 35 or 40 I was there.
I mean, maybe you're good at FIFA, but I don't think I've got my PlayStation back from that night.
Well, who learnt something out of that night then?
You took the title at my PlayStation. What about this one? Final one, sort of player side of things. Why did you never run a 2K time trial as a player at West Coast?
At West Coast, well, I have to thank Adam Simpson for that. So the 2K time trial. I think when I got there, as you mentioned before, I'd had a sort of a reputation. I'd had success. I'd been highly thought of, and Simo brought me over to try and help the group with some development, maybe on field, but a lot of it to do with off field. And if you had have seen me run a time trial, all of that potential high reputation would have been lost, and so that would have been a great way to lose the players straight away. So I thank Simo for not making me do the time trial.
I would have liked to have seen you do one, to be honest. Could you?
What time? What time do you reckon you'd go?
Hawthorn did a 2.2, and my best time was 7:10. So I guess I would have been a 6:30. That was my best run, but that was as a 23-year-old, not a 30-year-old. So
that's not bad.
Add a little bit to that.
So you don't find the player-coach kind of relationship difficult? I think, from my point of view, that you handled it quite well. So 2017, you finish up as a player and you move into the coaching ranks. Is that literally the last game you play or the last day at the club? Put your boots away and put your coach's shirt on, and then you're into planning for the season?
It was
more of a transition?
It was interesting. I was talking. So in my last 2 games, or my last 3 games, and we played Adelaide at Subiaco. It was the last game at Subiaco, and Adelaide were highly regarded, and West Coast had to win to make the finals,
and by a certain amount.
And by a certain amount. That's right. And we ended up. So I'm going into that game really thinking that that's unlikely, and this is my last game. And so I'm going to try to help the team win. But my wife, she kind of wanted to go on holidays and wasn't really sure about this sort of thing. So we ended up winning, and I remember I got quite a bit of a glare across the table because I got a Brownlow vote in that game, and my wife looked at me like, really? But then the next week it was a draw. And then what happened was we played after the siren, and Luke Shuey brought it home against Port Adelaide. And what that meant was there was a great amount of joy amongst the group. In particular, I remember Jeremy McGovern saying, 2 extra weeks, boys, because winning that game meant you got extra 2 weeks for pre-season.
Yes.
And I was quite thankful because, it was my first year finishing playing and going into coaching. So I thought, 2 extra weeks, I'm going to need that. This will be my first year with my family where I don't have to be a professional athlete for my whole life, just about.
Yes.
And then, we ended up losing the next week against GWS. It turned out to be my final game and the final game of that season. And then I, thinking that I would start 2 weeks later. And I remember Craig Vozzo was, 1st of November, you start the same date. So all that would happen over that period is I'd lost 2 weeks of holidays. So that was my first introduction into coaching, is all of the you get so many perks as a player. You live in this cocooned world where all of those sponsors you mentioned before are looking after you, and your boots are clean for you, and people make sure you're where you need to be all the time, and if you forget something, someone will have it for you. And then I went to being a coach. My very first session I wore white socks, and Adam Simpson said, you wear black socks, and I was like, I haven't got any yet. He's like, yeah, we'll go get some. And I had to go I ran off the track and stole black socks out of one of the players' bags and ran back onto the track because I wasn't allowed to be out there with black socks. And so I quickly learned that being a coach is a very different world to being a player.
What does the first sit down as a coach look like? Brand new coach. Are you going doing a course on some sort of what they call orientation course as a coach? What does that look like?
I think one of the quotes that I would use, I get we've been joking around a bit, but I get a little bit serious, is that players, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So the first thing, advice for other coaches, but also my way that I would go about it, is you have to get the players to understand you as a person and get them to know who you are, what you're about, what your values are. And once they do that, then they'll start to listen to you about any sort of technical skills or technical things that you want to teach them, any tactics or scenarios. But until they know you and what you stand for, then their listening skills are going to be reasonably low. So first meeting is basically I would I don't remember it exactly, but it would have been something around, this is what I'm about, this is what I stand for, and this is the stuff that I don't accept. And what do you want from me? And then I remember you always set players up with that question, like, what do you want from me? Because the first thing they'll say is honesty, and then you can use that against them for the rest of their careers. Because you asked me for the truth, and here it is.
Well, we happen to have it on good authority from one of the people in the room of your first meeting with the players, what you actually said.
I'm nervous about
Would
this.
you like me to tell you what you said?
Okay.
This is apparently from a premiership midfielder at the West Coast who said on this show, on BackChat, quote, Sam Mitchell, I'm here to win you guys a premiership, so that's what we're going to do. And then you showed pictures of a mountain or something with a cup at the top, basically. And then you repeated that the week before the grand final. Fact or fiction? I know it's fact, so don't say fiction.
I think the gist of that would be, I don't think I would have said, I am here to do this. That's a bit of a stretch. But the concept, we're here to win a premiership, which is what every club is doing. So stating that early is certainly... that's right down my alley. So I imagine I would have done that. There was some bumps on that journey, but we got there pretty quickly.
Correct. That's something to highlight.
Did you
there, Dan?
What was that?
Have a look at your run sheet.
Something.
I feel a bit like blindsided.
Yep.
You both have earpieces in and computers and run sheets, and you're leaving each other notes, and I've got
You're the guest,
nothing
mate.
over
This
here.
is-
This is how it works.
I was going to ask memories of coaching Scoey. Anything that comes to mind?
Oh, it's his show, and he's always going to have last say. So,
No, just
No, this is it.
you go for your life.
well, I didn't coach Scully, really. I mean, he was a defender, and he was not the favourite son, I guess, but he always had a bit of an X factor about him. He always brought something the players always liked. Playing footy with him because they knew that he would produce high levels of effort, even if sometimes his skill level didn't match what he was trying to do. But he was a guy that you knew you could rely on.
Okay.
So there's a backhanded whack in there, but you can read into that good or bad. Up to you.
That's good. I mean, what is match committee like for people that don't know that just they see the coaches rolled out and a big bunch of you sitting in the coaches box and great coaching today. What about match committee? Inside match committee, not Hawthorn. Use West Coast if you like. What do you do in there? You're in there a long time. What are you guys doing?
Well, Sam Frost, one of our Hawthorn current players, he came Monday last week, and he came to match committee and he sat there. And at the end, I said, what'd you learn today? He goes, I should definitely eat before I come to this meeting next week. Because we've been in there 3 hours and he hadn't had breakfast or whatever. So
I've heard stories about lengthy match committees. What takes the most time?
I mean, post-game, match committee personally, as the coach, my match committees are reasonably brief.
Yes.
But post game, they put the agenda up, and it's a nightmare. You got to do the coaches' votes for the coaches' association. Then you do offense, defense, stoppages, forwards, backs, mids, any scenarios that you went into, any GPS reporting, the VFL. Reserves report, rating of every player and their feedback to make sure you're aligned, because I don't want to go and say, hey, I thought you played really well, and then the line coach say the opposite. So getting alignment on what happened in the game. Plus, what are we going to review today? What do the players need to learn? How can we make them better this week? What environment do we want to create for them? Do we want them to be a bit edgy, or would we like them to have some joy this week? Setting up the week early. One of my philosophies is around, if you have 8 hours to cut down a tree, spend 6 hours sharpening your axe. I think it's Richard Nixon, but you might be able to check that.
It's quite good.
Just claim it.
Charlie,
That's yours.
But you are, if you're well prepared, then your week can roll out quite smoothly. So I usually, we have quite lengthy meetings the first day or two, and then it's pretty smooth after that. Our match committee. The part that everyone's interested in is selection, and I'd be lying if we had one meeting where, okay, we picked the team today. Normally you have a vague idea. We know this guy's coming in. There's a couple of guys could go out. We'll see how that falls, see if anyone breaks down. So, for instance, at this week, I've got a guy coming in, but I don't really want to take anyone out. So I go to the trainers and say, all right, we just need to train them hard enough to break one, and then we'll be okay.
It's a little bit for our listeners.
It's a little bit facetious, but it's also sometimes it happens and you're like, oh, that's good.
You don't have to let someone down. Perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
What about are there heated debates between I have no idea what they look like, so I'm just imagining in my head a picture of a guy on the table and there's one person arguing for their case and someone else is out. Do you ever just have to yield and go, cool, all right, and just accept the decision?
Yeah. Of course, it doesn't get to heated debate too often. Usually it's it's my call at the end of the day, but most of the time rely on the line coach. So if there's a position available and it's a winger, then you go to Robert Harvey and say, okay, this is the position that you're going to be the guy that plays there. The thing that the head coach has is sometimes the head coach has got the longest view in the room. So, for instance, early draft picks or players that you've got really high hope for or that are injury prone and that are feeling good and in some decent form, if you want to get them a run, they might not help you the most that week. So you do need to try to sum up. There's always performance versus development in a match committee, and sometimes it's the coach's job to even out whatever the rest of the group is thinking.
What about when you blokes dropped me for the 2018 final series? What happened in that match committee?
It was pretty unanimous. I
Then someone went down and it made that decision easier.
Yeah, that's what he's talking about. He's like, oh, we can.
That was one of those ones where, okay, who was coming back? Is it Shep ended up hurting himself?
It's actually Jets.
Yeah, so Jet, we were a bit tall and cumbersome in the back end, and
it was always a favourite of the coaching committee. Oh, we're a bit tall this week.
Well,
even though I could play small, did so for my whole career. A bit tall this way. It's like it's just an
have
excuse.
you got over that or not?
No, absolutely not. I'm not.
You did play in the one that mattered.
Yes, I know, but not thanks to you.
Not my area.
Yeah,
I'm a
correct.
midfield coach.
So let's talk about that 2018. Your midfield coach. You lose, decent season, but it wasn't like it was a dominating season where he was undefeated. You've probably been close to involved in that with some of the Hawthorn seasons you played in. But Gaff, Natanui out towards the back end of the season, which really changes the dynamic of West Coast midfield. Gaff on a wing, plays the same position every week, does the same thing, very reliable, and Natanui does what he does in the ruck. How was that as your first season as assistant coach to deal with like two really big outs coming towards a final series?
Yeah, it was a really. There was so much talent in that group. Like that was a phenomenal. We had Dom Sheed playing in the reserves.
Yep.
So Andrew Gaff going out of that side brings Dom Sheed in, and we all know how that finished. So it was a crazy amount of talent in that group, and what was really easy, and Simo was quite good at this, was really role driven. So you just had a role to play, and whoever was best at playing that role, that was who played in that game. So because of the clarity of the roles, it made picking the team reasonably easy. And it was the thing with the midfielders, there was such versatility and strength of talent in that group that they were a reasonably easy group. They were desperate for success and had a high level of talent. If you got those two things, then you're pretty well set.
You can answer this or not. What was the vibe in the coach's box like when Gaff hit Brayshaw? Was it an oh shit, or was it like a confusion?
My only memory of it was that you didn't see it because it was not right. It wasn't live, so it wasn't right in our eyesight or on the vision. And you're watching the game, you're looking at different aspects. As a coach, you do miss a lot of the game. I know that sounds funny, but as a midfield coach, you're just watching the midfield, so you rarely see a goal scored. And as a backline coach, you don't probably see any goal scored except for the opposition because you're always looking at your own area. And the only person who saw it was one of our analysts who had the vision and was rewinding and looking at the broadcast vision that you see at home on your television. And he said, "Oh, this is not good. We better be careful with how we handle this." And then showed someone else the vision and making sure that Gaffy was going to be okay for the rest of that game and etc. So at the time, you just have so many other things to do that you really focus on the moment. As a head coach, you have to have all those bigger picture things in your mind. But as a midfield coach, it didn't make a huge influence on the way I coached that day.
Just breaking from 2018, what's that like going from assistant coach? You talk about a midfield coach, or if you're a stoppage coach, you're just watching stoppages. You don't actually see the game. To then head coach, where you're the opposite. You might not actually be seeing any stoppages, or you have to see everything. Like, is that a big mindset change?
It's quite difficult as a line coach, in particular if you did forwards or backs, where you're just watching one end of the ground the whole time. And so you would find your eyes, get drawn away to watch something that you shouldn't be watching. And when you have a young coach who's new, quite often they say something about, and you're like, how about you just watch your area, mate? The backline coach talking about the forwards, vice versa. So you're always trying to get everyone to do their own jobs. And as the head coach, you get to look at everything, and sometimes you get stuck in the detail, but you try, certainly as a head coach, I try not to get stuck in the detail too much, trying to look at the big picture of, and you're really a problem solver. Backline coach, what do you need? Anything we can do to support the defence here? Are you feeling vulnerable behind the ball? Asking questions of that coach to see if they are comfortable with what their group is doing. And if you do that with all of your staff, that means things are going reasonably well as the head coach.
Given that you'd experienced back on 2018 this playing group in person as a player in 2015, a lot of the guys that played in that game coming into the 2018 grand final, we are able to use any experience as a player with either Hawthorn or with the group as West Coast to prepare the group grand final week to try and win a premiership, because the group hadn't been able to do it 3 years earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I'd been through that as well. I lost a grand final in 2012 and then we won the next year. Sharing part of your journey, and I think that was the 2015 was one game. It's just one game that group lost. And making sure there's not any skeletons in the closet and talking about it, I thought was quite helpful. So some guys didn't really want to and were quite uncomfortable, particularly with me having played in that game. But I always felt like a cleansing of the soul was needed. If you just need to watch it, open it up and say, look, I was terrible. I probably cost us a grand final here. And in 2012, I still have the odd person who reminds me I should have thrown the ball back to Jared McVeigh because it cost me us a 50 and potentially cost us the game. So, I'm no stranger to not performing well in those big and that costing you. So, I thought we handled that pretty well, and the boys were not too flustered. Even after the start of the game was pretty ordinary, to be honest.
It was quarter time. You remember what you said to the boys at quarter time? To the group, to the midfield group?
I remember that we'd had the game was a lot of the game was on our terms, and DeGoey had kicked 2 goals that just DeGoey did DeGoey things. No one else can do what he did.
I only won the first. I was on him, so it was only one.
Well,
but it was Jaden Stephenson had kicked a couple.
Yeah, so
it was 5-0 at one stage.
I think it was 5-0, but the game wasn't really not on our. The game was reasonably evenly played despite the scoreboard. So as a coach, you can jump at shadows and change things because of the scoreboard, but really the game was on our terms. So I don't know exactly what I said, but I think that if we persist, then we're on the right track here. I feel like you're going to stitch me up
again. Well, I've heard a lot of boys talk about it. I've heard multiple sources who were in that meeting once again that you said the forward line aren't getting the job done here. We're on top of the game. We're winning the midfield battle. Backs are shitting the bed a little bit, but we as a midfield group are going to have to kick some goals here because the forwards aren't kicking them. Something along those lines.
Yeah. So
and when I say something along those lines, exactly those words.
I'd have to go back and have a look, but I imagine what I would have been trying to get the midfielders to do is to think forward rather than support the defence. That seems like a message you would give if you want your midfielders to think forward, to move forward, to get closer to the 50, to give themselves opportunities to have shots on goal. Collingwood were very well set up defensively. So our shots from outside 50 was a good way to score against them. So the idea from a coach, fact or fiction isn't the most important thing. The story that they hear and they believe is, and the influence you can have. So me telling them the forwards are struggling a bit, we're going to have to kick the goals, that I imagine took anxiety away from the playing group, have a little smile probably, and they looked over at, JK or whatever and had a little chuckle to themselves, and I'm going to have to do your job for you. That incentivises them and gives them joy. And in a grand final with 100,000 people, 5-0 down, that is exactly the feeling that I obviously thought they needed at the time. Don't tell the forwards, they won't see this.
No, correct. Don't worry about the forwards. What do you think they're doing? Watching YouTube highlights or something. Dom Sheed, having a shot at goal. You're a coach. You're in the coach's box. Heard some audio. Like what's that like as a coach with a premiership on the line, effectively?
I remember getting asked this, but I think Josh Kennedy and Chris Maston both had shots prior.
Yep.
And really, as a coach, you're in the what can we do to help? I mean, the coach's job, you can't do anything other than set the players up for success and try to help them. So when he's having the shot, it's like, okay, if he kicks it, we're going to do this. If he doesn't kick it, we're going to do that. Either a super offensive game or a super defensive game. So the riding the kick, I don't know if there's vision. I might embarrass myself.
No, I'm not setting you up for anything.
I don't imagine there would have been all that much emotion in the coach box because there's still enough time for them to come back at this point. So we're really thinking about, okay, if he kicks this is what has to happen at the centre bounce. And if he doesn't kick it, then at the kick-in, we need to do this. We need to get this message to the players to make sure they can implement either one of those things. So I don't think there would have been much emotion. Probably the least emotion in the coaches' boxes of the 100,000 people there, I'd imagine.
Does that surprise you?
A little bit.
It's true.
With the time, this is purely practical with the time counting down. Are you seeing that? Because often it looks like at the end of the game, coaches are like surprised not surprised, but like when the siren goes. I know you're focusing on the game, but are you counting down the seconds?
I haven't had a game that close where I've done the jump up and cheer or the opposite. Not yet, but we do. There is a time clock there, so if you jump up with 3 minutes to go, the runner can't go out. I don't know if that was the rule then, but with the last 3 minutes, the runner can't go on the field. So as a coach, you actually can't influence the game unless the bench can yell out, which they're not going to be able to do at grand final day. So I hope at the 3 minute mark, unless there's a goal scored, there's literally not a thing you can do as a coach. So at that point, other than put those funny little signs up,
Win.
So
GWS, I had that.
Yeah.
Win.
Yeah. So I think that last 3 minutes, you're really just enthralled in the game and you're watching it as a spectator. But hopefully it doesn't come down to that too often.
Did you code the game after? Like, so coding is coaches going through and putting markers on players, different things that happen, how we set up at stoppage, how the game plays out. Every game, coaches do that. Sorry. But for people listening, that's what I mean by coding. Did you sit down and rewatch that game and code it?
So a normal game, I'm a bit of an over coder. But it probably takes about 5 hours to code the game. So, and for an individual,
every game.
So you get the game and you get it on your computer. And it takes about 5 hours to go through it. And then so as a midfield coach, I would have maybe between 30 and 50 edits for each player. So not kicks and handballs, but where he was running, why he was running there, things to show the player. And so 5 hours. What I didn't code the game, no. But, I didn't code it like that. But I did code it for things that I hadn't seen in the game. So I sat on the plane and watched it on the way back to Perth. And it just took me while I was on the flight, just fast forward. Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't notice that he did that. Or how did he get there? And picked apart a few things.
Do you remember showing me something? I'm literally just remember you showed me something on the plane. No, I potentially hadn't had too much sleep. And, a couple of beverages. But you showed me something on the plane. Because we're up in business, they had the coaches back in economy. Boys up in business.
Did I wander up the front and show you something?
Yeah, you did.
Was it the last play?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you remember that? Because I actually, at the time, or maybe wouldn't have remembered that I did that.
Because you laid off a ridiculous amount that you shouldn't have been doing and then ended up winning the contest, which you didn't win the contest, someone else.
Yeah,
you drew someone else up, but because you did something outrageous, you did this run or something outrageous,
yes,
which you shouldn't have been doing.
I tell this story.
But then Jeremy McGovern saved your backside,
yes,
and ended up. But without you being an idiot, he wouldn't have been there, and we wouldn't have won or something. I think I've actually heard you say that story
multiple times.
You know what's underrated? What's underrated is Flying Ryan's mark.
Yeah,
that is a genuine. That's a big physical mark in a key moment of a game. That was that whole play. Everyone talked about a lot of stuff, but to me, that mark was unbelievably important.
In a regular game, that would be like mark of the year contender.
Oh, you're going over the top now.
No, that's pretty good.
But only because of the moment. It took a lot of balls to go for it in that way that he did. It was very impressive.
You head back to Hawthorn, you finish your time at West Coast, Premiership, no worries. I mean, we couldn't do it with you as a player, so we fixed that up and put you as a coach and then got it done without you. You move back to Hawthorn, really, I guess, start ramping up that coaching journey. What's that like coming back, playing under Alistair Clarkson here at Hawthorn, Premiership captain, all that sort of stuff, going away, applying your trade a little bit away from home and then come back? Does the relationship change between your head coach, Alistair Clarkson, who was your playing head coach and then assistant coach?
Oh, I think as a player, you're very much behind. You're very much in front of the curtain. You only see the show as a player, and I guess my playing career, I probably got to see as much behind the curtain as any player did because I had done a lot of preparation and had learned a lot. And I think coming back, I did get, you're all the way behind the curtain at that point. And so you do learn a few things. And, the same things I was talking about before about no one cares how much you know until they don't know how much you care. There was this real changing needed. Like I remember I had a great conversation with Ben McAvoy and he said, you're preaching about, getting the best out of each other and really having a loving environment and making sure you're pumping each other up. But I remember playing with you and you were a bit of an arsehole. So you need to reconcile file that with me. So then we had a lot of good discussions about what I'd learned over my, last probably 8 years as a player and coach, and then, making progress towards what I believe the philosophy to be now that will take us to success.
Was it important to step out of the Hawthorn Footy Club?
Yeah, I mean, we had a great. The 2 years I had, so we lived in Perth for 2 years, and it was, from a career point of view, it was vital to go somewhere else. So my advice to anyone is to go and work somewhere else. And I mean, I always had my wife and I. We'd always lived in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. So we grew up, a couple of suburbs apart. We'd always lived in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. She lived in London for a couple of years in her early 20s or whatever. But I'd never lived anywhere else. And so there's a part of me that thought, I don't know what I don't know. So going somewhere else would be worthwhile. And we had when we look back as a family, when we look back on those 2 years, we had a great time. There's so many great experiences, going to Rottnest Island and, Cottesloe. I know you're going to sledge
Living
me.
in Cottesloe. Just, where am I going to live? Oh, just go down to Cottesloe Beach and live down there.
As someone who had
was it just right there somewhere.
But we had a great time. We learnt an enormous amount about ourselves there, like just how the kids, like my son, he was not a fan of water at all, and now refuses to go to the beach basically because we tormented him over there getting him to go to the beach so much. But just the different environment that we learnt about over there, and then when we came back, we moved back into our old house, and we had this level of comfort which we hadn't had for a couple of years, and we really loved that. And coming back to Hawthorn there was a level of discomfort about that though, because it was me the player versus me the coach, and you're trying to rebuild relationships but with a different dynamic. Whereas going to West Coast, I knew that was happening, so I built the relationships in a way where I knew I would coach them. Whereas as a player, you do things with players that are silly, but now I'm their coach, so there's still a bit of that kicking around.
When do you coach your own side in the VFL? 20?
21.
Last year.
Yep.
So a couple of years as assistant coach at Hawthorn, and then you coach your own side for the first time. I'm assuming you didn't coach anywhere else. No sides in the summer or anything.
No.
So is that what's that like, coaching your own team?
Coaching your own team was something that people always said you had to do. You have to coach your own team. And I didn't really believe that. And I still think that you can be a successful AFL head coach without doing that. But certainly what it does is it teaches you a lot about responsibilities. So I remember my first day and few days of actually being an assistant coach, I learned an enormous amount about training planning. Like, as a player, if the ball wasn't ready when I needed it and you're at the end of a group and there's no ball, I'm like, are you so disorganized? You can't have a ball ready? Like, honestly. Or the cones aren't where they're meant to be. But as a coach, you recognize it's actually really hard work. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of effort to make sure there's balls where they need to be, cones where they need to be, drills are all set up, and you go get drink and come back, and obviously the drill's ready. But someone has to do that. And when that's you realize there's all these important things that have to get done behind the scenes. And as a head coach of a VFL side, the same thing happens. You're trying to organise staff, you're trying to organise who's going to be where, who's doing which role, the role clarity of all your staff members. And that learning those responsibility with less on the line becomes important. How to manage relationships, because as an assistant coach, you have 15 players and a head coach. Really, that's your circle of influence. There's obviously other coaches you spend a lot of time with. As a head coach, I've got now 44 players. There's 7 of us as coaches, plus a football department of around 25. So there's close enough to 100 people that you're having significant influence with. And if you spend an hour with them, that's 2 weeks. So your level of time management becomes really important. And I learned a lot about that coaching Box Hill.
So that's a lot about the logistics of it all. What about the philosophy of, assistant coach to head coaching? I'm assuming it's different. Is that an easy enough question to ask? What's your coaching philosophy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't,
a couple of hours to get through.
I didn't come up with that once I got that job. I mean, coaching from 2009 or whatever, when I first started my coaching journey, you're really developing a philosophy that whole time.
Yeah.
Whether you like a fast team, a slow team, a smart team, or an athletic team, how do you play? So. Endless question. Do you choose a game plan that fits your players, or do you choose players that fit your game plan?
Do you choose a game plan?
So, for instance, if you have a lot of really leery and fun-loving defenders,
yes,
do do you make them into hard-nosed, back shoulder,
Right.
get the job done?
So we spoke to Jimmy Bartell, right? Geelong were playing very slow and defensive at the start of 2007, and they had this big thing like, we're an exciting, fast-moving team. They were built of those players. So they basically said the game plan to those players, let's attack and play lots of... So that's game plan to players, correct?
Yeah.
What's players to game plan? Like trying to change them into hard-nosed defenders?
Well, exactly. So, I mean, you can... So, if I chose a player like Lewis Jetta, for instance, in talking in West Coast terms, if you had a whole group of Lewis Jettas and you tried to play a really slow, diligent game, really low risk, control the ball, don't get scored against. Now, that's the wrong personnel for that. So, if you have a coach that wants that game style, how do you reconcile that? Whereas... By the same token, if you've got a bunch of Schofields who just want to defend the whole time and don't care about offense as much, and they hate getting beaten. Those guys who just hate to get beaten. If they're trying to play this really flary game, and I'm underselling your...
Absolutely. I was going to say, sorry, mate.
Mind you, Sam Butler isn't a better example. Someone like Sam Butler who just wanted to shut down his opponent, didn't care about getting the ball at all.
Send this to Butsy, please.
Yes. But you have to have a game. You have to have a game plan that fits your personnel, and you have to draft for your game style. So there's this challenge around, and that's an example of how you build your coaching philosophy.
So what's yours?
It's a great question. I don't know if I should answer too much about it. I mean, I think for me, you're always trying to get ahead of the game, especially like at Hawthorn. We've got a young group. We played the youngest team on the weekend of anyone for the round, and so. If we try and play the way Melbourne and Geelong are playing, they're going to be better than us at that. So we need to figure out what the next iteration of the game is and then play in that way. So then in 3 years' time, when everyone's trying to play this new style, we've already been playing and we've learnt all the mistakes. And there's other teams saying, oh, we're not going to beat them at their game. They've been doing that for 3 years. And so we need to try to figure out as a group, as a coaching group, what's the next iteration of the game? And to me, the game is quite defensively dominant and has been for the last couple of years or maybe 4 years, and now has started to open up a little bit more, scoring starting to go up a little bit. So being at the forefront of that will be important for us.
You've played under a couple of coaches you've coached under a couple of coaches and played under one that, in my opinion, probably did that a little bit. Alistair Clarkson with the zone, effectively, 2008, and Adam Simpson with what we did defensively as a team in 2015. So would you say what you've just said, it's rubbed off a bit, what Simo and Clarko did that as well, trying to get ahead of what other people are doing?
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches do that, but it doesn't always work. So you're always trying to work out what the next thing is. I think every coach with a developing team is doing that. Well, I think they are. Some coaches are trying to emulate what the last successful era has done, but really the success comes from being able to think forward. And there's a riskiness about it because everyone's saying, oh, Melbourne do this, and you don't do that, you do that. And it's like, well, I can copy Melbourne if you want, but they're going to beat us because they've been doing it for years and years. And so that's the challenge. But you have to hold your nerve because every person is going to come at you and say, you're not doing what the other best teams are doing. You're not competing the way the other teams are doing, and you have to be able to hold on. You need a really good support. You need your board and your CEO and everyone to be on board and understand what you're about, and then you've got the confidence to go forward with that mantra.
Yeah, that's good. Do you feel that confidence here? Is that too?
Yeah.
Is that too?
Yeah. No. That's I mean, part of my reason for
what you're doing now, right?
Well, part of my reason for taking the Hawthorn job and once given that opportunity is the understanding that the board and the CEO and the footy manager is an interesting position because it's one of those ones you're like, oh, what do they really do? Do you really need them that much? Like, are they important? And like, if you'd be destroyed without that person being an absolute star. And so having all those people together, knowing and committed to what you're doing, it's really easy to talk to players. You talk to them all the time. But going up and talking to the CEO and the board and making sure they're aligned with what you're about is really important because otherwise when you lose a game or win a game that you should have done the other, they need to be singing out of the same hymn book.
How much influence does the people in those higher positions have in your decisions as a coach? Like, are you left completely to your own device, or like, are you being... I mean, not necessarily you, but a coach is told to play certain players a bit more from higher ups, those sorts of things?
Well, not at Hawthorn, no. No one from above has... I think role clarity in the professional game now, it's a huge business. And what the role of the head coach is quite clear for me. And I'm not sure it's the case everywhere, but for me, I know exactly what my role is, and I know where my role starts and finishes. And sometimes as a head coach, you actually have potentially too much influence. You can influence what your media messaging is and what your list management is, but you need to have really stringent protocols and rules around who's in charge of what. And so I know that at the draft, when the draft comes, I know I could be desperately in love with getting this one player, and if he's still on the board, it's not going to be my call at the end.
Right.
And I accept that, and I know that that is a fact, and it's the right way. Now, it doesn't mean I won't be unhappy with it at some stage, but making sure that that's the same for me as a head coach, but the same for whether that's the footy manager or CEO or president. Everyone has their role to play, and if you have that, then you get great strength of a group.
What about the coaching role itself? Given you've come from different angles, right? As a player, as an assistant coach, as a player across 2 clubs, the captain, you've kind of seen a lot of intricacy around football clubs, and now as the head coach. What's something that people, punters like Dan and I, wouldn't know about being a head coach? What's something or a few things that happen that people would just be like, what happens behind the veil that never saw as a player?
You need to be more.
I'm padding for you.
You need to be more specific. You need to give me like a realm. Like, is it around?
Is there like
what happens in the coach's box that people don't know about?
The coach's box, you'd be surprised how calm our coach's box is currently. I've had a couple of games where I have not coached very well when things haven't moved smoothly. But
that's the coaching term for he's cracked the shits up in the box.
I just haven't been able to think clearly. I went and coached from the bench, and coaching from the bench is good because you're with players and you can give direct, as soon as a player comes off, you can look them in the eye and give them a high five and say, oh, make sure on that one you do this, or, that technical stuff. But you actually can't see the game particularly well. And there was we needed to make a change, and it was a bit of a chess move. And I needed just like a quiet minute to like shut my eyes and think my way through. And when you're in the coach box, that's fine, because no one's really looking at you. Maybe a camera will be there, but players aren't influenced by you because they can't see you. But I've got 4 players sitting right next to me. I can't exactly put my head on my hands and actually think clearly for a minute. So little things like that are different.
What about when you see the other coach? Like, do you notice when the other coach goes down to the bench, you're like, oh, maybe I should go down there too? Like, is there those sorts of
you get FOMO for the bench? Yeah. No, I don't know. Actually, I know that in our game against West Coast, Adam Simpson went to the bench at halftime. And I mean, what would take me to the bench is if it's not a tactical game, if it's an effort game, or if someone is involved in an incident, altercation, or gets a big injury. They're the things that take you to the bench because you're trying to control morale more than tactics, and I think there's a time for that.
Is there anything stepping into your first season as head coach this year that you found difficult that perhaps you didn't expect would be? Again, along the lines of maybe dropping players, although you've done that a lot as an assistant coach, or maybe hard moments that you walked in and when it's happened in reality, you're like, oh, gee, that's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious ones. The obvious ones are dropping players, delisting players, telling players that you've delisting players. I mean, I got appointed at the end of last season and had to do delistings, and it's like I haven't even coached these players, or I've coached them at Box Hill, and I'm finishing their dream. Maybe, hopefully, we can help you get an opportunity at another club, but that's unlikely. So you guys who you have a lot of respect for and you enjoy them as people, but you don't think they can help you from a football perspective, you actually have to tell them that their dream's over. So that's easily the hardest. But I refuse to feel sorry for myself because it's much harder being on the other end of that message. And so dropping players, particularly when they're established players, dropping young players who are getting opportunity, who aren't potentially up for the level anyway, is okay. But dropping players who have been successful players and deserve games potentially, that's quite difficult.
Do coaches drop players? If you get a 50-50 call on someone, you can't split them, play the same role. Don't know how to flip a coin. Will coaches make decisions around dropping a player that they may think will react better to getting dropped, that may actually rebound quicker and not drop their bundle? I'm referring to myself because I felt like at stages that would happen in my career. No, seriously, because
you wouldn't crack it, or you would?
I'd crack the SADs for 5 minutes,
yep.
But the next day of training, I'd try to be the best trainer, and then I'd go back to the waffle and I'd get in the best players, and then I'd be back in the team. I wasn't I mean, I played 200 games over 14 years, so I knew how to get dropped and get back in the team, right? I was the most dropped player at West Coast Eagles in the history of the club, right?
You seem quite proud of that.
I am. Absolutely I am. I wasn't giving everything on a platter like 329 game Sam Mitchell.
Did you get drafted when you were 18?
Okay, perfect. 17 actually. But my point is that a thing?
We haven't experienced that. I'm not the big coaching expert who's got all the experience in the world. I've coached 17 games as a head AFL coach. So at this point, have I decided between players how they will react? No. But I could see that happening where you're like, if we drop this guy, we might lose him. Like, from a mentality point of view, it might take him a month to overcome that. So usually, I imagine there'd be like a warm-up conversation where you say, look, you're getting close to, you need to perform here because your spot's not going to be guaranteed if you keep performing it the way you are. And so then you're at least giving them a chance to earn their spot back. So I've done that a couple of times.
What's the coaching fraternity like? Are you chatting amongst each other? Are you texting? Like, if there's a certain team you dislike more than others, are you giving advice to the other coach on how to beat them?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I'd love to do like not a family tree, but a communication circle of who talks to who. Not just amongst head coaches, but just around clubs. So every club's got like an opposition scout, and they always seem to know someone that's been there and knows something about how that club operates.
And every club has one as well.
Well, every club has one. So we always talk. Our guy gets some information. He's like, oh, we know that about that club. It's like, yeah, what'd you tell me about us to get that info? So there's this great debate about that. But some of the coaches from other clubs that I have worked with over the journey. So a guy like Chris Fagan, if we're playing a team who they've just played, then I would call him and he'll give me some info about what they focused on and vice versa. I got a call, I won't say who it was, but he called me and he goes, and we won the game, and he goes, oh, yeah, loser calls. So just so you know, the way this works is the loser coach always has to call the other coach, and then you don't know whether that's 24 hours or 24 weeks later, but the losing coach always makes the phone call, and then you're okay after that. So there's little protocols. I'm still learning my way, but I know maybe around half of the head coaches I would talk to at different stages.
It's like this society they all get together.
Yeah, I got we had a coach's Zoom the other day, and Gil McLaughlin was sort of just giving a head coach update, and it was a bit of a stitch up, but CJ, so Chankoth Jath, one of our players, he walked. He's very, very fit and handsome guy, and I think you'll be able to put a graphic up when you show it. But he was going to the pool, and he walks past my office to go to the pool. He's just wearing a towel and his budgies underneath or whatever, and he looks in and he sort of half gives me a bit of a sledge, like, oh, what are you doing? Door shut. And I said, oh, come in. And he walked around behind my desk, and he didn't know, but I've got a Zoom with like everyone on it.
Every head coach.
Well, they're not all their cameras are on, but maybe 8 of their cameras on. But Gil McLaughlin's the biggest screen at the top. And he comes on and he like looks at the screen and he actually stays there for a few seconds before he recognises like I'm on. And then he sees them all start like smiling. And then James Warple is in the same kit and he's like, what's going on? And then he jumps in behind. So I've got these 2 blokes in towels behind me in my office, and Gil McLaughlin is presenting to the head coaches, and I'm just shaking my head. And by the time I like look back, there's 8 of the coaches are like, what is going on? And the meeting was a schmozzle after that.
That is very good stuff. Very good. Now, I think you've heard enough from Dan and I. Questions done and dusted. Social media, which I know you know about. Don't look at me with those eyes.
I've taken great joy out of acting like I haven't seen any of your stuff. And you haven't. I've been waiting for a bite the whole time, and you haven't.
I know you do, mate. I know you're a head coach now, but I know you too. So, social media, I know you've been waiting for it. One of the great podcasting segments of all time. It's perhaps your second or third iteration here. You're back for business. We get the people to ask you the questions.
I saw this morning on your Instagram thing, and
so we don't need long to put these together either.
I don't know about this. I haven't been prepped for this at all. I'm a bit concerned.
Oh, do you need the questions sent
Well,
to
normally
you,
what happens as a head coach, you get this media prep, and before this, they said you'll be fine. You don't need media prep for this, and I'm like, oh, I disagree, but. Now, if I get it wrong, it's actually going to be Jackson Payne's fault. Every time I mention him, I get a free coffee and a muffin. So Jackson Payne.
To add for the crew as well. I mean, just on that though, You're a big boy. You've done this. You don't need preparation. You're a smart man.
I know. I
You
had
can-
no preparation. That's what I'm saying.
Very good. Okay.
Even
Oh,
if you do get prepped in a certain way, maybe they'll change it on the fly as well and ask you questions that you're not
that
ready to
seems
ask
like
anyway.
a social media thing.
So I'll ask one of these. This is by This is from Kobe.Lacroix.
Yep. Which one? Would you like
It's
the,
not. It's not Mark.
would you like the first
top
one?
one?
or
Yeah,
the
top one.
Top
thanks.
one. Was Mark Lacroix the biggest pest at West Coast?
Was he still there when I was there? I don't remember him that much. Did
Oh,
he
wow.
do?
Oh, boy, that's whack. Very good.
Love it.
Very good. Oh wow, that probably
I do remember too far Lacroix. They said just be careful because it doesn't rhyme with Mitchell, but I probably could have had a similar nickname.
I was going to say, if you're too far wrong with Mitchell, that would be your nickname.
Yeah, so I think we had a mutual respect for each other's level that we were willing to go to in that area.
Hattie Knacker.
What were your first thoughts when you saw the Hawks draft Mitch Lewis post you leaving?
When you
the irony,
Jordan Lewis left.
So Sam Mitchell and Jordan Lewis. Well, I have asked them about it since. I said, surely you were like taking the piss a bit. And they said, this is how funny it is from a Hawthorn perspective and how in the reads that recruiters are. In their minds, Mitch Lewis. They'd never once seen his name read out as Mitchell Lewis. So they had not put it together. Would you believe that?
Wow.
Yeah.
I've got to follow up on that. Do you really miss Sam Butler that much that you need to go and bring a Sam Butler into the football club?
Can I? This will break Sam Butler
West Coast's
heart. But twice this year I have called him accidentally trying to call the other Sam Butler. And then he answers, he's like, what's going on? And I'm like, oh shit, I've called the wrong one. I'm like, oh mate, just ringing in, just checking how the family is and that. But I've actually been trying to call the Hawthorn Sam Butler for whatever reason. So
I actually invited
apologies.
someone to the movies doing that, accidentally messaged the wrong person, and then they rocked up, and I was like, oh,
No.
I messaged the wrong this, yep.
That's great.
So, yeah.
Brian Kirkup _
Which player had to improve for West Coast to win a flag, and how did you help them fulfill potential?
If you had to name one.
Wow, that's a good question. I think there were a couple of players there who were right on the precipice when I got there. So a guy like Jack Redden or Chris Maston, they were role players is a bit disrespectful. They were better than that, but they didn't maybe believe they were better than that. And so just telling them, I almost just said, you're better than you think you are. So respectfully, I'm smarter than you, so you should listen to me. So you're better than this, you should do this and this, and because you can. And so I think sometimes those players who have been at a club for a while and have had the same group for a while, sometimes they just need some new eyes on them and to have the things that they could do highly valued. So I think both Redden and Maston did things that don't go up on the stat sheet but really help the team. And I think when I went there was some genuine A grade talents. It's still there. I mean, Gaff and Shuey and Nicknat and Sheed obviously became that. Yowie. There are some they're A grade players, all of them, and I think those guys felt, I just need a role. And the other one would be Mark Hutchings, who sort of had to retrain a little bit. I think he always wanted to be this offensive guy, and once he really embraced his role as a defensive player, he was unstoppable as a defensive player.
Maston, you told him to get out of the gym and just run because you're good at running. Like, why are you spending so much in the gym?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it made no sense to me, this skinny kid who was not built for the inside, and he was a fantastic runner, but he wasn't winning the running. And I'm like, you should be the best runner here, so be better at that. And I don't care about your muscles, mate. So don't worry about the beach. And that, I think there's this fine line for all players where they need to be strong enough, but not cumbersome.
You don't have to answer this, but I just find it funny because you and Sam Butler, West Coast, talk about this a bit. Short for Decker.
Why is Shannon Hearn better than Luke Hodge?
As a captain, I would put at the end there.
Shannon Hearn is a stalwart and one of the toughest players I've seen. I just saw him got cleaned up by Mitch Lewis and finished. I don't know if this will be public, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but I think he went to hospital and pretty nasty injuries. And he just jumped up and ran off, and Mitch Lewis laid down for a long time. I've told him about it. But Shannon Hearn is one of the toughest players I've seen. But unfortunately, Hodgie is the best the best captain of this generation. So it's not too damning to say that he's got bugger covered.
Fair. Kristen _ Hogan. Nah, don't worry. Selby Listier. Now,
Can you not read the questions? What's happening? Why do you read which ones
this
and
is
then
what we
you
do.
read it?
this is
How
what
we
this
do
is what we
I
do.
know that, but I want to know why.
We're almost done, so you just keep answering the question. Selby Listier, right? Selby Listier has won fantasy in Australia twice. He's now playing Super Coach. He's in the top 10. It's a different game, and he's clocked the
Which
country.
fantasy, like FPL?
AFL.
No, which one did he win?
He won the Dream AFL Dream
Right.
Team Fantasy. Won it twice in a row.
Yep.
2 cars. He runs a fantasy program,
Wow. Yep.
and now he's doing Super Coach with a completely different game, different scoring procedure.
I'm not sure I'd
You
call
would've-
it completely
Right.
different.
So were you one of those players that used to?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Keep your own score. Anyway, he's put a question in. So
Okay.
this is fantasy.
So
related,
this
no
is
doubt.
a big guy. Okay.
Yeah, it's big dog.
This is
Dylan Moore. What's his potential this year? Full-time midfield role? Question mark and beyond.
He wants to know if he's playing in the midfield or not.
He's played in the midfield the last 2 weeks, and his future is as a forward-thinking midfielder. So whatever you read between that, what you will.
Yeah, vague.
Keep
mother.
him in your team would be what I'd say. If that's
Very
what,
good.
That's
Well
what
done.
he's actually asking. It's
Very
not-
good. Yes, correct. Live _ Flora.
Does have a bit of a sore knee. We might rest him this week.
Oh no. that will go viral. I'm telling you, everything you've said this episode, which has been a really actually great, insightful interview, that will be number 1, mate. You are an idiot.
Liv Flora, who's someone you would want playing under you from another AFL team? Is tampering a thing in the AFL? Is that you allowed to say that?
I don't know if you're allowed to answer that. I mean, there's a lot of.
There we go. A lot of
There's
good
a lot
players
of-
across the competition.
Well, I don't know. Give me a position or something.
Okay. A forward.
Forward. Well, the Kings are going to be phenomenal players for a huge amount of time. I think the other one is Norton. I think people think he's an old player, but he's only like 22 or something. So he's a superstar. So they're obviously players. If they want to come over, they're more than welcome.
On the back of what you're talking about being a future-looking coach, I think this question's relevant. Chris _ Healy _
Where do you see the next change in the game of AFL?
Well, if you look at the rule changes and what the AFL is trying to do is they're trying to increase scoring in the game, and I think there's a newer generation of coaches that I think some of the younger coaches are a bit more that way inclined. The ball is moving quicker in general, so I'd expect scoring to go up. And to be a little bit more end-to-end. I think that they're trying to limit the AFL are trying to limit stoppages. They're talking about the last touch rule that they use in the sandful. So I think that scoring is likely to go up over the next few years.
Two
Let's
to
hope
go.
so.
2 to go. Nathan Major.
Sam, I worked the 2015 AFL Grand Final and stood next to you as you played keep-ups with a footy. I'm just curious, what's your all-time footy keep-up record?
Hard-hitting questions.
I don't count them actually, so I'm not sure.
It's a
I think, it would. Well, when I was a player, I mean, it's amazing how much spare time you have as a player, and you
Yes.
literally get paid to kick a football around. Like it's a crazy good job.
Yes.
I was talking about with our players today about your worst day as a footballer is better than a lot of people's best days in your actual workforce. So
Fact.
trying to make sure that you feel joy is one of those things. And little games like keepy uppy was one that always kept me. I felt like it kept me young.
I'll finish with the last. I just want to squeeze one more in. Do you ever think you'll not work in footy? And now this, currently have a job, and so saying yes, I will, puts a bit of an asterisk on your coaching career. But you've been in football forever almost. Do you look at?
Yeah, I mean, I did some study during my career, and when I looked at the business world, and particularly around the COVID, when the soft caps went way down, and no one knew what the future would look like. I had a lot of conversations with my wife around what our future looks like, and I've got this great passion for coaching, but I wouldn't have ever used that at the expense of what I could provide, and so the the idea of going into business and doing something outside of footy wouldn't scare me. If they closed down football and said there's no football anymore, I would be sad, of course, for myself and others, but I wouldn't be worried about my future.
Very good. Let's finish on this big one. Really big decision making here. 14-0 day.
Would you prefer a player to get 10 tackles or 30 disposals?
And I don't want to. I want an answer.
30 disposals. Getting 10 tackles is getting to the ball second 10 times. Let's just get to the ball first. That's how I would say that.
Very good, mate.
I used to say that. I say that facetiously, and I do say to our players, if they get a lot of tackles and not enough of the footy, I'm like, you can get to the ball first. That's better.
That's good. Mate, you've been incredibly generous with your time. We do appreciate it on BackChat here, mate. Thank you.
And thank you for bringing all your gear out to Waverley, at Bunjil Bagora. We're very happy to have you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly not close to where we're living, so thanks very much for having us out here, Sam. BackChat, _. You know where to find us on socials. Listen to us if you're watching to us on YouTube. If you are listening to us, you can watch us on YouTube. Sam's got a gavel for me right here. If you want to find anything we do, you can find it on our website, backchatpodcast.com.au. Send us an email, hello@backchatpodcast.com.au. Thanks to our supporters, Whippersnapper, Margaret River Roasting Co., Shelter, Leadable Cameras.
You did it.
No, I didn't. I missed one.
You've done a good job getting most
Whippersnapper,
of
Margaret
this.
Roasting, Leadable Cameras,
Blue bet,
Bet.
baby. Thank you very much. It's been fun. I know you've been impressed, Sam, even though you're not going to pretend. You pretend you aren't. You're impressed with my coaching. And I'm impressed by your coaching and my hosting. That's it. I'm done. Words finished out of
Hit the
my
gavel.
mouth.
It's a double. You can't do a double gavel. That's not how it works.
Is that a rule?
You need to go